In the vast, icy expanse of the Siberian steppes, there's a story so unnerving, so beyond explanation, that it has left even battle-hardened soldiers at a loss for words. What do you believe happens when the fallen refuse to rest? Keep listening. This tale isn't for the faint of heart. Welcome to the Nightside Archive. Tonight's episode, the Phantom Battalion of the Siberian Steppes. Our story begins during the Second World War. The Eastern Front was a brutal hellscape where freezing cold and relentless violence ruled every inch of the land. Among the Soviet soldiers stationed on the barren steppes of Siberia, whispers of a peculiar sight started circulating. They called it the Lost Battalion of the Steppes, a company of phantom soldiers who marched, seemingly appearing from nowhere, and vanished, just as mysteriously, into the Arctic fog. At first, no one took these whispers seriously. A soldier out in 40-degree weather, hardly dressed for the bitter cold, might see all kinds of illusions. Exhaustion, starvation, even the simple isolation of the tundra could explain it. But as the sightings grew more frequent, the dismissals gave way to nervous laughter and tribalized theories. The first real account, a documented field report, came from a young officer named Lieutenant Dimitri Ivanovich. Dimitri was a career soldier, pragmatic to a fault. He had no patience for ghost stories, no matter how vivid. It was late one January evening, under a pale blue moon and a suffocating silence that only Siberia can produce. Dimitri and his platoon were stationed at an improvised outpost, an ancient wooden cabin that groaned with every gust of wind. They had cleared a perimeter and brought in reinforcements the night before, after reports of German scout units creeping in on their position. That night, as Dimitri's men took shifts at lookout, it began. The first soldier to spot the apparitions was a sharpshooter named Andrei. Andrei saw what he described as dozens of gray figures moving in absolute silence over the frozen plain. Their movements deliberate, organized, but devoid of sound. Rubbing the frost from his binoculars didn't make them disappear. He nudged the man next to him in the watchtower, Vadim, another seasoned soldier. Vadim saw them too. From Dimitri's own journal, a record recovered long after the war, he noted the haunting sequence of events that followed. One by one, every soldier who was on guard confirmed the same thing. Figures wearing outdated uniforms, marching as if in a dream, their weapons eerily slung across their backs. Yet despite their disciplined formation, there was something off. Their faces were pale, ashen, lifeless, and their footsteps left no trace in the snow. No crunch, no displacement. They simply glided forward. By the time the moon dipped lower in the sky, the apparitions had come close enough that the men could see their insignias. They didn't match any known unit from the Soviet or German armies, or anywhere else for that matter. Dimitri was summoned, rifle in hand, though he found himself clutching it tightly as dread crept into his gut. He ordered his men to hold fire. Every instinct born from years of experience told him this was not an enemy they could simply shoot away. But then, it got worse. As if pulled by an invisible conductor, the march of the phantoms suddenly stopped. They stood at the edge of the outpost's perimeter, still as statues. The temperature, Dimitri later recalled, seemed to plummet unnaturally. It bit at their skin, their exposed faces turning a raw, angry red as frost crept along the edges of their weapons. One soldier couldn't take it anymore. Against Dimitri's orders, he shouted, a guttural yell halfway between defiance and fear. That's when the phantoms turned their gaze. It wasn't all at once. It was slow, deliberate, like a roiling tide of attention bearing down upon the outpost, their unmoving faces now fixed on the source of the shout. And in a blink, the silent air filled with an unearthly sound, a low hum that escalated into a quaking, almost metallic groan that every soldier swore penetrated not just their ears, but their very ribs. The platoon lost all cohesion at this point. Men huddled together, dropping rifles and gripping rosaries. Others whispered desperate prayers. Dimitri, resisting the urge to collapse, raised his weapon as if the small act of defiance might protect them. But just as suddenly, the phantoms began to move again, this time retreating, their spectral forms becoming even more indistinct as the fog thickened. Within moments, they melted entirely into the moor and were gone. Reports like these were met with skepticism from Soviet high command, predictably brushed off as paranoia induced by stress and extreme conditions. But Dimitri's outpost wasn't alone in their experience. Other units across the Siberian front had similar chilling encounters. Some attempted to explain the phenomenon with science. The foggy tundra, combined with the moonlight, could give the illusion of figures on the horizon, they said. Avalanches or echoes from far-off artillery might be misconstrued as ghostly hums. But even those theories couldn't account for the behavior of these figures, nor their inexplicable ability to incite dread so intense that grizzled veterans wept like children. And what of the insignias, the unidentifiable crests that adorned their uniforms? No records matched. Was it an undiscovered unit lost decades ago, condemned to repeat its last march for all eternity? In recent years, modern adventurers and explorers who trek the Siberian wilderness still report glimpses of eerie shadows and chilling noises carried by the wind. Some even found abandoned outposts, bearing hastily scrawled notes eerily similar to Dimitri's journal entries. It seems that whatever haunted those frozen plains nearly a century ago, it hasn't vanished. And if you ever find yourself wandering the Siberian steppes, pray you don't hear that unearthly hum or see the lifeless eyes of soldiers long since forgotten by history. So, what do you think happened to Dimitri and his men that night? Were they victims of a mass snow-driven delusion? Or did they stumble into a bizarre meeting ground for the living and the dead? More chillingly, are the Phantom Battalions still marching, looking for new recruits to join their eternal trek through the ice? Sometimes, the past doesn't just linger. It marches beside you. Sleep tight, brave souls. Until next time, here on the Nightside Archive.